On today's show, for the Capitals' young prospects looking to make their way onto this roster, it's not going to be easy. And GM Chris Patrick said to expect a dogfight.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about standout performers in the Capitals' 5-2 victory over the Bruins in the preseason opener. Listen, you saw players take big steps forward in the form of SONNY, MILANO, HENDRIX, LAPIERRE, but also great performances in net. So who really stood out? A bit later, we'll talk about the X factor in net for the Capitals this season. To be a clear assessor of last season, the Capitals got to where they were and where they finished based on the standout performances from Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren. What do they need to see in net this season? But just to get it going here, the big storyline around the Capitals was the 5-2 victory, a statement victory in the preseason opener against the Bruins. And listen, I listen to, some different podcasts and I'm on social media, and a lot of the people, the fans, are like, whoa, let's not get too crazy. It was only the preseason. I have a feeling that if the Capitals would have lost, they'd have put a whole lot more weight into it. Like, this roster is horrible. Some people just like the negative. For me, I was pleasantly surprised, not too surprised, but a 5-2 victory over the Bruins. Pretty impressive. You take a look at the Capitals, a lot of young talent sprinkled in with some veterans and some real signs of encouragement. SONNY, MILANO, who missed a lion's share of the season last season, popped off the page. HENDRIX, LAPIERRE, who signed that bridge deal, popped off the page. In net, Guerin Bjorklund, a brick wall. There is a lot to unpack and a lot to be excited about. So let's dive into it here in the first segment here, talking about what Chris Patrick said, expect to see a dogfight for roster spots. And what are some of the things that we know that historically the Capitals carry 13 forwards on their active roster and 8 defenders. So there's not going to be a lot of spots. And when we talk about defenders, we already know that they have Declan Chisholm and they have Dylan McILRATH, that they're going to have to just sneak their way in there. You're going to see the absolute best out of the young talent. And if last night's game was any indicator, it is going to be a fun preseason and camp. That much I know for sure. And Chris Patrick did say that. Expect a dogfight, quote unquote. And he's right. There's maybe 1.5 spots available total. That's it. And then you got Justin Sourdif already pretty much locked in on that 4th line right wing spot, that it is going to be very difficult. And if you look for the open roster spot, I would say it is that 3rd line left wing and the extra forward role. And, you take a look at, like I said, SONNY, MILANO, very impressive. But we see more of that? You see HENDRIX, LAPIERRE. Can we see more of that? Because that was the big knock against those players before, in particular about HENDRIX, LAPIERRE, is that he would play really well in small sample sizes, but it wasn't sustainable, and subsequently why he got sent down to Hershey. And SONNY, MILANO wasn't because of poor play per se. It's, he missed a lot of the season due to injury, and then when he did play, it wasn't some of his best work. So here's the thing. There are like 6 or 7 guys all fighting for those spots. Broshnashenko, LAPIERRE, MILANO, coming back after basically missing a substantial amount of time. Ethan Frank, Bogdan Treneyev, Andrew Crystal, even a guy like Lyndon Lakovic who's been a surprise early in camp. Now, to be clear here, I'm not saying that, Linden's not going to find a spot on the roster. If he really impresses, I guess anything is possible, but I think that he is going to take another season to marinate playing for Moose Jaw, but very impressive right out of the gate. Doesn't look like he doesn't fit in. Doesn't look like the young guy on the team. And one of the things I've talked about is they kind of train these guys to just be those kind of guys, professional on the ice, carry themselves well off the ice as well. So, there's a lot of players and very little room. And if, you watch the game on Sunday, you saw it right away. Guys were laying it out on the line because they understand that they cannot have a poor preseason game or they're just going to get lost in the shuffle and just shot out of the mix. They're going to be out. They're either going to be sent to Hershey, they're going to be released, they're going to be whatever the case might be, that you need to see the absolute best from these players. And like I said, if, this is the Hendriks LAPIERRE that we're going to get this season, I'm liking it. Stood out. Miro had his moments, but the big story here is this is the most open camp we've seen in years. That there's not a lot of spots, but there are a lot of players in the mix. And Chris Patrick even joked about it in the office. He's never seen this much opportunity for someone to truly take a spot. A unique opportunity for these guys that, hey, they've worked their whole life to get where they are right now. Can they seize the moment? Because here's the kicker. The Caps don't really have the luxury of just stashing guys anymore. Because Hendriks LAPIERRE, for example, he's waiver eligible now. So there is a tremendous amount of pressure on a guy like Hendriks LAPIERRE to perform. You hear that, or he said that he has gray hair coming in, a young man that, just the stress of doing the thing that seemed like a clear-cut thing to happen when, first on the team, drafted, that he was just going to shoot right to the moon with the Capitals. It has been a slow build. It has been a guy that has faced some setbacks. That the fact that he's waiver eligible now, if he doesn't perform, there is a lot of pressure. If he doesn't make the roster, you risk losing him. Can you believe it? Hendriks LAPIERRE. There has been a tremendous amount of, faith, talking about trajectory, that this is going to be the guy of the future when he first was on the team, drafted, but it hasn't really materialized yet. But the thing I like about Hendriks LAPIERRE, facing setbacks, went down to Hershey last season, absolutely torched it, that he has not taken to the attitude of sulking and moaning and saying, woe is me, that he has made the most of his opportunities, but he understands the lay of the land right now, that he got that bridge deal. He's waiver eligible. This needs to be the absolute best version of Hendriks LAPIERRE, period. So yeah, it's not just a camp competition. It's a camp competition with consequences for certain players. The thing I know for sure, that the players that needed to stand out in the game one of the preseason did just that. Good. Check mark. But there's more. We need to see consistent performances throughout camp, throughout the preseason. As we know, there'll be different players in the mix Thursday night at Giant Center. And I want to see more of that. I want to see what Crystal can do. I want to see what a lot of these young players can do. Because, even for a guy like Ryan Leonard, there is nothing given. Right. I think that, it would stand to reason that Ryan Leonard should make the roster. But what if for some reason he doesn't really pop off the page? There's going to be no give-me's. And like Chris Patrick said, expect a dogfight. No one is safe except for the pillars. I'm talking Ovechkin, Wilson, these kind of guys. But for the young talent that needs to prove it, they really need to bring their A game. It's going to be fun camp and preseason. That much I know for sure. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about standouts in the preseason and what to expect going forward. Straight ahead. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet: player props, building a same-game parlay, or jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So say you're watching the Commanders or the Ravens. Say you want vested interest in all of the games. Open up the FanDuel app, put a little money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energies to Sunday. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment here, we're talking about standouts in the preseason, whether it was in the first preseason game or what we have seen in the informal skates and the start of camp. There is a lot of feeling of enthusiasm, optimism that for the first time in a long time, the Capitals are going to take a long look at some of the young talent. It's not just one guy, and, having them hang around camp in the preseason with the knowledge that we're just going to boot them down to Hershey. There is a distinct possibility that one of these young guys is the cream of the crop that sneaks his way onto the roster. But with that said, just because you make the opening night roster does not guarantee that you'll be here the whole season. So even if you make the roster, you're going to need to bring it all season long. Just ask HENDRIX LAPIERRE from last year, for example. So let's dive into that in the second segment here, talking about who stood out early. And like I said, there's been a lot to like here early in camp and in the preseason. And like I said, Sonny Milano, if you want to talk about making an impression right out of the gate, the first preseason game, that's what he did. The best way to put it: 2 goals, 2 assists, a 4-point night in his first NHL action since last November. But the thing about Milano, and I'm circling back to him because, I got to be honest with you. I'm not going to BS you guys. I was kind of feeling like he's not going to do it. What does Sonny Milano possibly have that a young player like a Crystal, one of these young guys, Miroshnichenko, what is he going to have that those guys don't have? Experience, NHL experience, miles on his NHL odometer, and the ability to seize the moment. Oftentimes you can get caught up with, draft picks and trajectory, in my fantasy league, it shows that this guy's going to be here or there. It's all nonsense. What do you do when you lace up the skates and hit the ice in a game, albeit a preseason game? Seize the moment. He did that. The skating, the creativity, the hands. He looked sharp. He did what he needed to do. And you could tell for a guy like Sonny Milano what it meant to him. He talked about how he never really knew when he'd be back, but he stuck with it. It was probably pretty easy for him to lose focus last season. Like, I am a square peg here in the round hole that is the Capitals, and this is a team that's leaning into the youth more than they ever have. Do I have a spot? To see him jump right back in the lineup and look that good, that is a huge sign for this team. Sonny Milano is a guy that this is a make or break season for him with the Capitals. That's something. And like I said, HENDRIX LAPIERRE, and man, I like the anger of HENDRIX LAPIERRE this season. He's not the young boy in the league anymore. He's got that prove it edge to him right now. He's calling it, you quote unquote, the FU attitude. It's a family show. But I like it. He's laying it out all on the line because he understands what's at stake. And honestly, you could see it in his game. He played center in that game, scored a goal, had 2 assists. His compete level, face-offs, net fronts, back checking, that's what Spencer Carberry was praising. And for a guy that could get waived if he does not continue to bring it, you could see what was in his game, the hunger to do great things. And Carberry flat out said nobody wants it more than Lappy. That's a powerful statement, because if your coach is saying that, that is quite something. And then other players that stood out as well. Miroshnichenko and Miro, he didn't score, but he had an assist and led the team, getting in some big hits out there as well. And don't forget, a lot of the young talent that, should be on your radar, maybe isn't on your radar. Bogdan Treneyev, he scores a goal in the game. So when you take a look at the score sheet and the players that scored goals, 2 by Sonny Milano, HENDRIX, LAPIERRE, Bogdan Treneyev, Ryan Chesley, that it's exciting, right? That it's not, and I know these guys weren't in the mix, but it's the young players. It's not the players that you would expect to see in a lineup like that you saw talent in there, like with Nick Dowd, you saw Duhaime, these kind of guys that you thought that, the veterans out there would be the ones that were getting all the production. It was the young players that came out to play, and, kind of the guys that in that mix, and I feel like he's got really kind of lost in this whole mix. We don't hear a whole lot, is Ethan Frank. 3 shots on goal. He had an assist and a point there as well. That, could he be the odd man out? If we remember back to last season, Leonard came and all of a sudden kind of supplanted him a little bit there. So for this young talent, like I said, it is not going to be easy. That much I know for sure. And in games to come here, Andrew Crystal still wants to prove he can stick. And, I went into this season saying I see him making the roster. And I understand what I said in this podcast. Usually 13 forwards, 8 defenders. They're looking for that extra guy. Can he be that guy? We don't know. We haven't seen him in the preseason game yet. But we saw in camp, looked good. I want to see Andrew Crystal and kind of, just take what we learned, what we saw. Sonny Milano, stood out. We saw HENDRIX, LAPIERRE stand out. Chesley, these kind of guys, Garen Bjorklund. Let's put that in a compartment and set it aside and just take a look at the next game anew with the different players in the mix and evaluate those. That's what it's all about. These games are about assessments, whether you like it or not. And I know that we're kind of hardwired, being sports fans. It's all about wins and losses, right? But it's all about assessment, that I want to see how these players perform. And then there's the dark horses, right? Henrik Rubinski, who could sneak in if you keep showing. And so right now we're talking about Milano and LAPIERRE making the biggest statements so far. Like I said, there's another game on Thursday, and that's the dogfight, like I talked about in this first segment. Every single game, every single practice, we need to see a whole lot more from these players that want to make it in there. Some players, they did what they could do, right? I'm talking Milano and LAPIERRE. They did the things that they could do. And as the games move along, as the camp moves along, how do those players progress? That you saw a good thing out of Logan Thompson. You saw some good things out of Garen Bjorklund, and I'll talk about that in the next segment. But all things considered, I've liked what I saw out of this preseason game. And then what do we see in the camp going forward here? A lot of excitement, like I said, going into the 25-26 season, is that there could be a young guy that's going to sneak his way onto this team and change things, because we know a couple things. Changes are coming. Alex Ovechkin is entering into his final year under contract. He could ride out into the sunset at the end of the season. John Carlson, same goes for him. Trevor Van Riemsdyk, that, there's not going to be a lot of roles this season, but that gate's going to open up, in the seasons to come here. And which of these young players that we've heard about for years, and which young players that were added here recently, Lyndon Lakovich, for example, when are they going to be the next wave of Capitals players to make their own identity of the Washington Capitals? All right, so coming up here after the break, I've spoke a lot about young talent, but one of the X factors going into this coming season here is net minding. Logan Thompson, Charlie Lindgren, can they duplicate that success this coming season? I'll break it all down straight ahead. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. The thing that I absolutely love about Monarch Money is you can see where you're spending your money wisely and where you could use a little bit of work. And if you have a significant other in your life, you can kind of plan your financial future together. I know that you're going to love it. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment, if you can't tell, I am very excited about the start of camp and the preseason. And it's really to get kind of drunk on the stats, talking about the offense and what we saw from MILANO and LAPIERRE. But there are certain things that the Capitals are going to need to see if they want to see continued success as far as being good as last year, and dare I say, even taking a step forward. And one of the X factors is, what do we see in net from Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren? Listen, Logan Thompson had a breakout season last season. And to be clear here, if it wasn't for LT, the Capitals would not have made it as far as they did. Now, some people would say, hey, did you forget about Charlie Lindgren in this whole situation? No, I didn't forget about him. I'm going to go ahead and say the Capitals would have not fared as well if it was Chucky, and say they never acquired Logan Thompson, say it was like Hunter Shepard, something like that, Brian McClellan did the thing. He understood that, with the Capitals net minding tandem with Darcy Kemper going out to the Kings, that it was unproven with, a Hunter Shepard, Charlie Lindgren tandem. I kind of liked the idea at first, but, now that I saw, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that, Logan Thompson could be in the mix here, who, played well out in Vegas, could have, stood to have more opportunities, but was looking for a fresh start. And he found that with the Capitals and absolutely was the brick wall in net that the Capitals needed, was in the mix for Vezina voting as being one of the Vezina finalists, that he was the guy. But in order for the Capitals to continue their success, to pick up that torch and continue to keep running with it in the 25-26 season, you need a guy in net that can stop the shots, right? The Capitals play that much more confidently, just like every other team, when they have a guy like Logan Thompson in net. And you've seen that before, that maybe the Capitals didn't play as well with Charlie Lindgren, and they sure didn't play as well with Darcy Kemper, that there is some secret sauce with LT in the nets. Let's dive into that in the last segment of the show. One of the X factors this season is, we saw Logan Thompson play well last year, right? And he got rewarded with a long contract with some good term there, but can he duplicate that? Is that contract going to age like a fine wine, or is it going to age like a carton of milk? Because, we were talking about forwards, but the biggest factor for this team's playoffs hope is net minding. Logan Thompson, that is the guy. And if you don't remember, last season, he was top 10 in wins, goals against average, and save percentage. And one heck of a record to boot, 31-6-6 with a 2.49 goals against and a 9.10 save percentage. Take a picture, look back and admire it and go, wow, that's really good. In a vacuum, just isolated alone, 31-6-6, 2.49 goals against and a 9.10 save percentage. That's good, but you need to take that, crumple it up, throw it away, because this is the 25-26 season, and you can't live on former glory. You can't rest on your laurels. He's going to have to bring it. And those numbers that I just spoke of are elite numbers. I don't want to get that lost in all this. And if you look at the playoffs, players that really stood out, for example, a comparable Sergei Bobrovsky, for example, helped Florida to get to the final with a .914 save percentage. Logan Thompson, he was right there as well with a .917 save percentage, nearly identical. That Logan Thompson did the things that he needed to do. Can he continue that next season? Because the Capitals looked good in the playoffs in the first round anyway against the Canadiens. Not so much the case in the second round against the Hurricanes. That's fine. But, I'm not here to say that was Logan Thompson's fault. That was big picture. We need this team to be better all around, but all roads lead through great net minding. And can Logan Thompson be the guy again? And think about this. When Thompson gave up 3 or fewer goals in the regular season, he went 28-4-3. That's an almost 80% win rate. So when the Capitals are dialed in, playing a great game around him, Logan Thompson just seals it up and nothing's getting past him. If the Caps are winning 70 to 80% of the time when he's sharp, you've got a recipe for a deep run, and I think he's the guy to get it done. But one of the things that was glaringly apparent, just to kind of dovetail with this a little bit here, is Garen Bjorklund, that the pipeline is loaded for the Capitals. It's Logan Thompson, it's Charlie Lindgren, it's Clay Stevenson, it's Garen Bjorklund. There's a lot of options in the mix if, certain things hit the fan, if you know what I mean. Now, Charlie Lindgren, people have always said it's not a 1 and 2. It's more of a 1A, 1B situation, kind of semantics at the end of the day. Still a really good 1B, if you will. And we know he can steal you games. But if Thompson is healthy and playing the way he did last year, he's the biggest X factor on the roster, period. Because if you pair strong goaltending with this injection of youth and speed up front, you've got a team that not only sneaks into the playoffs, but maybe, just maybe, makes a serious run. There's a lot at stake. This could be the last hurrah for the Great Eight. Alex Ovechkin, before he sails off into the sunset, or, he could go play one last season with the Dynamo Moscow. Well, I guess we don't know what the case is, but what a fitting farewell for the Great Eight. To do a great thing, to push late into the playoffs and do something that was unthinkable surrounding this organization, until they did it in 2018, win a Stanley Cup. And before people poo-poo it and say, let's not get ahead of ourselves, it seemed pretty improbable in 2018 as well. The Capitals are gearing up for one heck of a season. A great netminder in Logan Thompson, and Charlie Lindgren's no slouch either. You got this youth infusion. You got Ovechkin, who seems to be dialed in, injured right now. I get that. But before that, he was gearing up, getting ready for the season, was in really good shape. A precautionary at the end of the day. I think that Alex Ovechkin will hit the ground running to start the season. You got Tom Wilson, who's gearing up. You got John Carlson, the nucleus. You put that together in a pot with, the young talent, the guys vying for spots. This could be a sneaky good team that, like a lot of other years, people kind of turn the blind eye to. The Capitals got lucky in 2018. Why weren't they able to do that again? All things that'll be fun to watch. Like I said, Alex Ovechkin, even though he's out of the mix right now, he should be full go to start the season. You got great young talent. Great options in net. This is going to be some fun hockey in 25-26. Book it. And I hope you keep it right here to Locked On Capitals. Listen, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.